Okay, here we are, part 2 of our step-by-step landscape painting of the red tree. This is Karen Alari, and we're doing this step-by-step video in real time. It's a long video, nine parts altogether, and in doing that I want to show you how I'm mixing my colors, talk about the process, and this is really a learning experience as much as just watching the painting. So I'm still continuing with my block-in stage of the painting. I've laid down my darkest darks and I'm moving on to some of my mid-tone greens here. And I've mixed this green with Ultramarine Blue, some Cadmium Yellow Medium, and some Quinacridone Gold. With a little red in there, Cadmium Red, to dull the color down a little bit. Whenever you're mixing colors and you don't want the color to be so bright as it is coming straight out of the tube, you want to gray it down a little bit. What you do is add a little bit of the complementary color. So for this green, I added a little bit of red to gray it down just a little bit. Again, I'm just putting in flat masses of color, trying to focus again on the value. Get the color pretty close, but at this point your real focus is getting the shape in the right place and getting it the right value. I'm lightening up my green here a little bit, added a little more red and a little white. Whenever you add white to your paint mixture to lighten it up, it also cools it. So you'll always end up having to add a little bit of red or a little bit of yellow, some other color that's going to warm it back up, unless you're trying to make a lighter, cooler color, obviously. So I'm continuing with these greens and looking at my reference photo and putting the green in wherever I see it on the image. This is just a real mid-value, a little bit on the dark side. When I put these masses in, you know, each area is going to have highlights and shadows and midtones in each area. So you squint your eyes and look at the photo and try to find that mid value in that mass. And that's one of your best tools to use when you're painting, is squinting your eyes, because when you do that, you take out the detail and you tend to it tends to bring the values. If there's 2 or 3 values that are pretty close to each other, it brings them together so you can see what that average value is. So now I'm looking for sort of a mid-brownish color to put here in this center part. One thing that we talked about when we chose this photo was that I felt like this strong mass of the dark tree there was a little bit, the painting was a little bit out of balance, because most of these bushes off to the right were light colored, and so as I talked about during that video, I'm going to go ahead and push this mass of weeds off to the right in darker colors and more vivid colors, because I want it to balance that big dark mass of the tree. So here I'm trying to find this light value of the field that's over to the right here. So I'm comparing the value of that to the hill behind it. And you can see again, it wasn't light enough, and I was getting too much paint in that area, so I just took my paper towel and wiped off some of the paint, because again, this is the block-in stage and you want to keep the paint thin and flat. 1, you want it to dry quickly, and 2, these aren't your final brush strokes, so you don't want them to show up. So I'm happy with that value, and you can tell it's not going to be exactly that same color, but I'm happy with the value, so I'm filling in that shape. I'm also, on the edges, I want to make sure I don't have hard edges, especially don't want to have a line of paint, a thick ridge of paint. So at the edges of these big masses, I'm being sure to scrub that paint into the canvas well and make sure there's no hard edges. Soften those edges up a little bit. Okay, so continuing with this color here that I'm mixing, which was quinacridone gold and white, and then adding a little bit of blue in there to gray it down again. The quinacridone is a yellowish color. It's a dark yellow, slightly orange color. And here you can see I've made it quite a bit more orange. I put some Alizarin Crimson in there and then added some blue to it. The blue being the opposite or the complementary color of the orange will gray that down a little bit. Because right in here I wanted almost the same color but in a darker value to be on this edge of the tree. One thing you want to remember is this concept of the lightest light next to the darkest dark is where you want to put that at your focal point, because it's going to draw the most attention. So even if some of these areas in the front were very light, I'm gonna darken them down a little bit. I'm gonna reduce the value because I don't want the eye to be drawn there. I want it to be drawn up to my focal point. So continuing with lightening this color up again, testing it out. That strip of green I have in the middle there is in the reference photo. There's some weeds down the middle of the road that have some little wild daisy-like flowers growing, so I want to make sure I know where that's going to be placed. And again, just filling in this lighter color because I'm massing in the big shapes. And you can see that this color is a little bit lighter than, a little bit darker than the field in the back. That field on the right hand side is completely sunlit and bright, so it's going to be lighter. And again, that's an area that I want your eye to go to. So even though this part of the painting might be just as light, I'm going to darken it up slightly so that your eye isn't drawn there. Now I'm moving that color into a more gray color, so I added blue, I added red, which is purple, to that already yellowy color. So if I have all three of my primaries in there, that's going to make a very gray color. You see how when I'm mixing these colors, in acrylic paints, the paint dries on the palette, even though I'm using a stay wet palette. So I have wet paper towels underneath there and then a disposable palette paper. So it's keeping them pretty moist, but it's not like oil paints. You're not going to be able to mix a big pile of the color you want and come back to that later in the painting. That's just not going to happen. It'll be dry by then. So you can see I just take basically the same pile of color that I'm mixing, and I just move that color one direction or another. I have an area that's basically green, and this basically grayish color now. It's moving towards a gray, and I often have an area that's basically dark. And then I can just move that pile of paint to whichever color I wanted. In this situation, I'm moving it darker. I wanted a gray there, but I wanted a darker gray. And as you can see, as I put it down, that's a little too dark, and I want it to dissolve into a lighter color as I go up. So I'm just adding white straight onto the canvas and then mixing that into the paint I've already got. Ending up with too much paint on my brush, so I wiped it off into my paper towel there. This swooping line of the path of the road is a very important part of the composition. It's kind of a static composition in the sense that there's a lot of movement or anything going on, and it's going to get its movement and its sense of grace, I guess, from the swoop of the road. So I want to really work with that and play that up as I go, and I use my brush and I follow that swoop just as if you were, as you might have seen in some of my other videos, painting water, and I follow the flow of the water with my paintbrush, and doing the same thing in this situation, but now I'm following the flow of the road almost as if it's a river. So I'm continuing just to fill this in, finding where I want the more grayed colors of the road versus this yellowish, light yellowish color is actually some cut grass, that is on the road, some cut and is dried out. So that's where that color is coming from. We're getting pretty close to being done with our block in here. Remember, we're just looking for the large shapes of the right value and pretty close to the right color. So that's, once we've got the canvas all covered with that, then we will be done with this block in stage. So I'm adding now a little bit of a grayer and lighter green, less vivid, so it's got more red in it. It's pretty easy with color mixing that way. You look at the color and go, well, is that too green? Okay, then I need to add some of the complementary. Is it too dark? Okay, I need to add a little bit of white. And by saying, is it too this or too that, you're always comparing it to the area right next to it. Don't necessarily compare it to the reference photo purely, but you want to compare it to the area next to it. As long as you have the relationships right, then you're going to be okay. Your colors might end up moving quite a bit off from the reference photo if you want them to, but you still need to get the same comparison, to the area right next to it. Is this lighter than the area? Is it darker? Is it redder? Is it bluer? Whatever it might be. So I'm kind of coming to the end, and what I'm doing here is I'm just putting some water on my brush, getting most of the color off, and I'm going back and finding all those little spots in the canvas that didn't get filled in, that are little whites of the canvas are showing through, and I'm looking for that and just brushing them in. So we're about at the end of this segment of part 2 of the red tree, and we're going to be moving on to part 3. And my block in is almost complete, but as you'll see in part 3, I found some things I didn't like about it, so be sure and join me in part 3, and you'll be able to see the finish of the block in and what adjustments I find that I need to make. And here I'm just finishing off by taking a look at the reference photo and comparing it, and I'm not sure, is the block in complete or not? Join me for part 3 and we'll finish up.